Chapter 6. The Hyksos. The name of Hyksos, which comes down from the days of Manetho, deserves very special attention, and the monuments confirm what we know of the lost book of that historian. Quoting him, Josephus says, "There was a king called Timaeus. In his reign, I know not for what reason God was unfavorable." And Timaeus is another variation of that. Or Timaeus, or Timeos are other variations. In his reign, I know not for what reason God was unfavorable, and a people of inglorious origin from the regions of the east suddenly attacked the land, of which they took possession easily and without a struggle. They overthrew those who ruled in it, burnt down the cities, and laid waste the sanctuaries of those they considered to be gods. They ill-treated all the inhabitants, for they put some to the sword and carried others into captivity with their wives and children. Then they made one of themselves king, whose name was Salatis. Otherwise known as Saltis and Selitis and Saites. He fixed his residence at Memphis, collected the taxes from the upper and lower country, and placed garrisons in the most suitable places. But he especially fortified the eastern frontiers, where he foresaw that the Assyrians, who were the most powerful people, would endeavor to make an attack on his kingdom. When he had founded the Sethroit, a city very conveniently situated on the east of the Bubastite arm of the Nile. On account of an old religious legend, it was called Avaris. He extended it, fortified it with very strong walls, and placed in it a garrison of 240,000 heavily armed troops. Thither he betook himself in the summer, partly to watch over the distribution of the provisions and the counting of the pay to his army, and partly to inspire the foreigners with fear by making his army perform military exercises. He died after he had reigned 19 years. His successor, by the name of Banon, reigned 44 years. After him, another Apaknan, or Apaknas, 36 years, 7 months. After him, Aphobis, or Apophis, 61 years, and Anas, or Janias, or Janas, or Anan, 50 years, 1 month. Last of all, Aseth, or Aseth, or Asez, or Assis, 49 years, 2 months. These 6 were the first kings. They carried on uninterrupted war with a view to destroy the land of Egypt, even to extermination. The whole people bore the name of Hyksos, that is, the king shepherds, commonly called shepherd kings. For Hyk in the holy language signifies a king. As we said before, Hak. and Sos, in the dialect of the people, a shepherd, are shepherds. Thus combined they to form Sos. Some think they were Arabs. Now the word Sos corresponds exactly to that of the Egyptian Shasu. Hence they have been identified with the Hak Shasu Badawi. Their old national name, in the course of time, obtained in the popular language the secondary sense of shepherds, that is, a nomad people who followed the occupation of rearing cattle, which has at all times formed the sole wealth of the inhabitants of the desert. If the objection should be raised that the monuments, as yet discovered, pass over the name of Hyksos in silence, it must be remembered that by far the greater number of contemporary monuments have completely disappeared from off the Egyptian soil. Meanwhile, it may be well to compare the information existing in the few extant inscriptions with accounts in Greek tradition. Manetho's name, Hyksos, is undoubtedly in complete agreement with the supposed Egyptian word Hakshasu, king of the Arabs. Wanderers are shepherds, and it is not therefore necessary to maintain that they invented for themselves and assumed it on account of their office. Rather, it is probable that the Egyptians, after the final expulsion of their Semitic tyrants, formed the nickname Hakshasu as a contemptuous expression for those princes who, for several centuries, had regarded themselves as the legitimate kings of Egypt. A tradition of the Middle Ages furnishes a contribution to the proofs of the Arab origin of the foreigners, for a legend tells of certain Shaddad, a mighty man, the son of Ad, who conquered Egypt and extended his victorious campaign as far as the Straits of Gibraltar. He and his descendants, the founders of the Amalekite dynasty, are said to have maintained themselves for more than 200 years in Lower Egypt, where they made the town of Avaris the royal residence. According to Julius Africanus, who epitomized the work of Manetho, the Hyksos kings are said to have been Phoenicians, who took possession of Memphis and made Avaris in the Sethroite Nome their chief fortress. This tradition is not without a certain appearance of truth. The ancient seats of the Shasu Arabs and of the Phoenicians extended westward to the city of Zorotanus. Consequently, the two races must have come in the closest contact, that amidst such a mixture of nations, the cultivated Kar would obtain the foremost place scarcely needs a proof. But whether they or the Shasu were the originators of the movements against the native kings is a question which scientific research has hitherto been unable to answer. The inscriptions on the monuments designate that foreign people who once ruled in Egypt by the name of Men or Mente. On the walls of the temple of Edfu, it is stated that the inhabitants of the land of Ashur are called Mente. By the help of the Demotic translation of the trilingual inscription on the great stone of Tanis, known as the Decree of Canopus, in the Ptolemaic times. It's hieroglyphics demotic in Greek. Pharaohs at Giza. We can establish that such was the common name of Syria, in the popular language of the Egyptians, while the older name of the same country cited in the hieroglyphic part of the stone was Rutenu, with the addition of the East. In the different languages, therefore, and in the different periods of history, the following names are synonymous with Syria, Rutenu of the East, Ashur, and Menti. It is possible that in the late Egyptian Ashur, the Semitic Ashur or Assyria may survive. The old national name of Rutenu plays an important part in the history of the 18th dynasty. It would appear from the catalogue of the towns of Western Asia conquered by Shahutamas III, whose inhabitants submitted to the Egyptian rule after the Battle of Megiddo. that this name must have coincided with almost exactly with the country, included later within the boundaries of the 12 tribes of Israel. This information is a great help to the right understanding of the movement of the tribes in the eastern delta. It is certain that immediately after the expulsion of the Menta, the Egyptian kings of the 18th dynasty directed their campaigns against the countries inhabited by Rutenu. There must have lain, therefore, at the bottom of these constantly repeated invasions, the fixed motive of revenge and contribution for losses and injuries received. No doubt, the eruption of the foreigners into Egypt proceeded from the Syrians, who in their progress through the arid desert found the Shashu Arabs welcome allies who knew the country, and of the Semitic inhabitants settled in the eastern marches of Egypt. They welcomed brothers of the same race, with whose help they succeeded in giving a severe blow to the Egyptian kingdom and robbing it for centuries of all independent energy. Now, yeah, I would agree that the word Semitic kind of does refer not just the northern Semites that included countries like Israel back in the day, and well nowadays, but also that a good part of Egypt, because they weren't as dark in other features as the rest of Africa. Because some people divide the whole race thing into way too many races. Historical research concerning the history of Hyksos may be summed up as follows. 1. A certain number of non-Egyptian kings of foreign origin belonging to the nation of Menta ruled for a long time in the eastern portion of the delta. 2. These chose as their captives the cities of Zoan and Avaris, and provided them with strong fortifications. 3. They adopted not only the manners and customs of the Egyptians, but also their official language and writing, and the order of their court was arranged on Egyptian models. 4. I said 3, with they adopted, right? They were patrons of art, and Egyptian artists erected, after the ancient models, monuments in honor of these usurpers, in whose statues they were obliged to reproduce the Hyksos physiognomy, the peculiar arrangement of the beard and headdress, as well as other variations of their costume. 5. They honored Satak, the son of Nut. Sataks. I set the downward facing dog. What's the other name of the one? But I did 2 programs of Set as a model. As the supreme god of their newly acquired country, with the surname Nub the Golden. He was the origin of all that is evil and perverse in the visible and invisible world, the opponent of good and the enemy of light. In the cities of Zoan and Avaris, the Egyptians also didn't have the V sound. They would have had they did have a W and a U and that sort of thing. Splendid temples were constructed in honor of this entity, and other monuments raised, especially sphinxes, carved out of stone from Siam. 6. In all probability, one of them was the founder of a new era, which most likely began with the first year of his reign, down to the time of the second Ra-Masu. 400 years had elapsed of this reckoning, which was acknowledged even by the Egyptians. 7. The Egyptians were indebted to their contact with them for much useful knowledge. In particular, their artistic views were expounded, and new forms and shapes, notably that of the winged sphinx, were introduced, the Semitic origin of which is obvious at a glance. The number of monuments which contain memorials of the time of the Hyksos is very limited, and the names of these kings on their own memorial stones, as well as that of earlier Egyptian kings of the times before them, have in many cases been carefully chiseled out, so that in deciphering the faint traces which remain, we have to contend with great difficulties. This gap in the sequence of the monuments may be explained by the fact that when the native rulers were reestablished, they carefully obliterated every record of the hated usurpers. The names of the Hyksos kings, which cover the more than life-size statue at Tel Muqaddam, the border of the colossal Sphinx in the Louvre. Is it the Louvre? The Louvre? The Baghdad lion and the sacrificial stone at Giza. I said Louvre. Sometimes you drop even few sounds at the end of a word in French or something, so I don't know. Are erased with such care as to be almost illegible, and science owes merely to an accident the preservation and deciphering with certainty of the names of two of them. These are Akhenin-Ra with a family name of Apepi, and Nub with the official name of Set, the Powerful. The name of the first, which would have been pronounced in the Memphite dialect, Athetha, differs little from that of the king Athapis, who, according to Manetho, was the fourth of the above-named Hyksos kings. The names which designate the others are strikingly similar in sound to those which the entity treated as a god, Setnub, the Powerful, usually bears on the Egyptian monuments. In the Salier papyrus in the British Museum, we find the name of the foreign king, Apepe, in connection with an Egyptian under-king, Seknenra. Page 1. It came to pass that in the land of Qasmat, belonging to the enemies, and nobody was Lord in the day when that happened. At that time there was indeed a king, Seknenra, but he was only a hawk of the city of the south. But the enemies sat in the town of the Amu, and 2. Apepi was king, in the city of Avaris, and the whole world brought him its production. Also the north country did likewise, with all the good things of Temera, and the king Apepe chose as a god Set for his divine lord, and he did not serve any of the gods which were worshipped in the whole land. Besides, he built him a temple of glorious work to last for ages, and the king, for Apepe, appointed feasts and days to offer the sacrifices in every season to whom he considered to be a god. Satux. Seknenra had, according to all appearance, incurred the special displeasure of the tyrant of Avaris, who designed to hurl him from his throne and sought for a pretext to carry out his intention. Before this, there had evidently been an interchange of letters between them, in which the latter, among other things, required the former to give up his own ones that he considered to be gods. And to worship Satux alone. Seknenra had declared himself prepared for war, but had added a proviso to his letter, in which he expressly declared that he was not able to pledge his assent to serve any other of these so-called gods that were worshipped in the whole country, but Imen-Ra, the king of whom he considered to be gods alone. This new message to the hawk of the southern city had been drawn up by a council and approved by the king Apepe. The papyrus relates this in these words. Many days later, after these events, King Apepe sent to the governor of the city in the south country this message, which his scribes had drawn up for him, and the messenger of King Apepe betook himself to the governor of the king of the south. And the messenger was brought before the governor of the city in the south country. He spake thus when he spoke to the messenger of King Apepe, who had sent thee hither to the city of the south. How art thou come in order to spy out? The messenger of Apepe, thus addressed, first answered the governor in these simple words, It is King Apepe who sends to thee. And thereupon he delivered his message, the purport of which was very disquieting and related to the stopping of a canal. 6. And the governor of the city in the south country was for a long time troubled, so that he could not answer the messenger of King Apepe. Oh, so I guess the last quote was 5 and 6 and 7 there. From the message. Okay. Maybe there are different parts of something, yeah. After the foreign messenger had been hospitably entertained. Oh, I just said I should know. Seknenra nerved himself to reply. The messenger then returned to Apepe, and Seknenra called his great and chief men, likewise the captains and generals who accompanied him, in order to communicate to them all the messages which King Apepe had sent to him. But they were silent, all of them, with all one mouth, through great grief, and wist not what to answer him, good or bad. Although the narrative is frequently interrupted by holes owing to the splitting of the papyrus, sometimes in the most important passages, that which remains is quite sufficient to make clear the persons and scenes and the subject of the historical drama. Apepe is the chief hero. His residence is at Avaris. He worships as his own divinity. He worships under what he considers to be his own divinity. I mean, not belonging to him, but you know what I mean. He accepts this divinity, Sataks, the Egyptian form of the Semitic Baal Zapuna, the Baal Zaphon of Holy Scripture. Lord of the North? Is that what they mean? He builds a splendid temple to whom he considers to be God, and he appoints festivals and offerings to him. At No, the city of the south, that is to say, at Thebes, there resides a scion of the oppressed Pharaohs, Seknenra, who is invested with the title of a Hak, or petty king. Apepe is all-powerful lord. Well, in that role, right? Among his courtiers are some who bear the title of Rakiket, that is, temple scribes. They give the king bad counsel, for they induce him to send a messenger to the petty king in No with severe demands. Seknenra receives him with the same question which Joseph, his contemporary, put to his own brethren when they went down to Egypt to buy corn, saying to them, Whence come ye? Ye are spies, and ye are come here to see where the land lies open. Nudeta Castra. After the hawk heard the demands of Apepe from the mouth of his messengers, he was deeply moved. The great lords and chief men of his court were I tried to pause the recording for that, but was deeply moved. The great lords and chief men of his court were summoned to a council, and the leaders also of the army, but no one dared to make a proposal for fear of the unfortunate consequences. Such is an abstract of this remarkable document, the subject of which was, without doubt, the history of the uprising of the Egyptians against the yoke of the foreigners. In order to find the termination of this story, it is necessary to go to the ancient city of El-Kab, where toward the east rise rocky hills with long rows of tombs, in which may be seen a painted world of the olden times, peopled with the forms of deceased ancestors. Among these are contemporaries of the Hyksos kings, whose descendants were among the heroes of the Great War of Liberation. In the sepulchral chamber, dedicated by his grandson to the hero Ahmes, the son of Abena Baba, and his whole house, is a wide-branching genealogical tree of the family which covers the walls of the narrow and much damaged room. Ahmes and his daughter's son, Pahir, form the chief persons of the pedigree. In a great text on the wall of the sepulchral, the chamber, the hero relates in simple language the history of his life. The deceased captain of the sailors, Ahmes, the son of Abana. Okay, and we'll get into that after we share this table here. The genealogy of the family of the captain of the sailors, Ahmes. Drawn up on the spot from the inscriptions in the tomb of El Kab in Upper Egypt. Her aunt, she gave birth to Abanababa, who fathered Ahmes, who married Apu, and whose daughter was Kama. Kama was married to Ateflera, whose parents were Pahir and Kam, Kam being the mother. But Kama and Ateflera, their children were Ahmes, Tupu, Tamu, meaning servant of the king, Sen-Mesu, guardian of Amen, Jahote Hat, Yemenhatep, who was a captain, Nubemheb, a princess, also Yemen Set, another princess, and Pahir, named after the grandfather, apparently, joined with Tenaheh, and her mother was Satati, or Herkurel, whose sons were Teta and Sa, captain, okay, and also Herkurelel and Satate had another daughter, Temahu. But back here, Yemenhatep was the daughter of Pahir and Henterneh. And she gave birth to Yemenmes, Technemset, was also princess, or Kames, Tatetes was also princess, Rahatep, and Nebet Taoeh, which was also the princess here. And we have 1. The deceased captain of the sailors, Ahmes, a son of Bana. 2. He speaks thus: I speak to you, all people, and I inform you of the reward of honor which was given to me. I was presented with golden gifts 8 times in the sight of the whole land, and with male and female slaves in great numbers. I had a possession of many acres. The surname of the brave which I gained will never perish in this land. Oh, in this land starts 4. He speaks further thus: I've completed my youthful wandering in the city of Aqab, which is Iolithaia, My father was a captain of the deceased king Saknenra Baba. 5. Son of Roant was his name. Then I became captain in his place on the ship the Calf, in the time of the lord of the country, Neb Bahute Ra. The deceased, King Ahmes, the founder of the 18th dynasty. 6. I was still young and unmarried, and was girded with the garment of the band of youths. But after I had prepared for myself a house, I was taken, 7, on board of the ship, the North, because of my strength. It was my duty to accompany the sovereign, life, prosperity, and health, attend him on foot when he went forth in his chariot. 8. To besiege the town of Avaris, my duty was to be valiant on foot before his majesty. Then I was promoted. 9. To the ship Ascension in Memphis, they fought by water on the lake Pazetku of Avaris. I fought hand to hand, and 10. I ganged and carried off a hand. This was shown to the herald of the king. I was presented with a golden gift for my bravery. After that, there was a new battle in that place, and I fought again hand to hand. 11. There, and I carried off a hand. I was presented with a golden gift the second time. And they fought at the place, taken at the south of that city, Avaris. 12. There I took a living prisoner and grown-up man. I plunged into the water, leading him thus as to keep him away from the road to the city. 13. I went holding him firmly through the water. They informed the herald of the king about me. Then I was presented with a golden present again. They, 14, took Avaris. I took their prisoners, a grown-up man and 3 women, making in all 4 heads. His majesty gave them into my possession as slaves. 15. They besieged the town, Sherahan, in the year 6. His majesty took it. I carried away as booty 2 women and a hand. A servant? Is that what they mean? Or some sort of jeweled hand or something. Maybe, I don't know. 16. I was presented with a golden gift for valor, and beside the prisoners were given to me as slaves. Maybe a trophy from battle or something. After his majesty had mowed down the Syrian, some of these actual hand. After his majesty had mown down the Syrians of the land of Asia. 17. He went against Kent Hen the Fur to smite the mountaineers of Nubia. Empty. His majesty made a great slaughter among them. 18. Then I carried away booty there, 2 living grown-up men and 3 hands. Okay, yeah. Servant. I was presented with a golden gift the second time. I also received 2 female slaves. 19. His majesty went down the river. His heart was joyful because of his brave and victorious deeds. He had taken possession of the south and the north country. Then an enemy came from the south country. 20. He approached. His advantage was the number of his people. Those considered to be the gods of the south country were against him. His fist is what's said there. His majesty found him at the water of Tent Ta Tot. His majesty carried him away. 21. As a living prisoner. All his people brought back booty. I brought away 2 young people, for I cut them off from the ship of the enemy. There were, 22, given me 5 heads beside the portion of the 5-hide sta of an arable land in my city. It happened to all the sailors in the same way. Then, 23, came that enemy, whose name was Tata'an. He had assembled with him a wicked company. His majesty annihilated him and his men so that they no longer existed. Then were, 24, given to me 3 people and 5 hides of arable land in my city. I conveyed by water the deceased king Sirka Ra Amenhotep I, when he went up to Cush to extend 25 the borders of Egypt, he smote these Nubians, Ante, in the midst of his warriors, being hard pressed, they could not escape. Bewildered, 26, they remained on the ground just as if they had been nothing. Then I stood at the head of our warriors, and I fought as was right. His Majesty admired my valor. I carried off 2 hands, 27, and brought them to His Majesty. We pursued his inhabitants and their herds. I carried off a living prisoner and brought him to His Majesty. Or, yeah, that kind of makes, if they're talking about it differently, sounds like they're carrying body parts off or something. I brought His Majesty in 2 days to Egypt, 28, from Himut-Hart, the upper spring. Then I presented him with a golden gift. Then I carried off 2 female slaves besides those which I had led. Though I think it may mean children's slaves. 29, to His Majesty. And I was raised to the dignity of a warrior of the king. And I conveyed the deceased king Seper-Ka-Ra, known as Jehotamus I, when he went up by the water to Khent-Han-Nefer, 30, to put down the rebellion among the inhabitants and to stop the raids from the land side. And I was brave before him on the water. Things went badly with the attack, 31, of the ship on account of its stranding. They raised me to the rank of a captain of the sailors. His Majesty, may life, strength, and health be granted him. 32. Here follows a gap, which, judging by the context, should be filled up to the effect that a new occasion called the king to war against the people of the south. 33. His Majesty was furious against them, like a panther, and His Majesty shot his first arrow, which remained sticking in the body of this enemy. He, 34, fell down, fainting before the asp on the royal diadem. A great defeat took place there in a short time, and their people were carried away as living captives, and His Majesty traveled downwards. All nations were in his power, and this miserable king of the Nubian people, the Anti, that's what their name for Nubians, was bound on the forepart of the ship of His Majesty, and he was placed on the ground, 36, in the city of Thebes. After this, His Majesty betook himself to the land of Rutenu, to shake his anger among the inhabitants of the land. His Majesty reached the land of Naharain, 37. His Majesty, life, strength, and wealth to him, found these enemies. He set the battle in array. His Majesty made a great slaughter among them. 38. Innumerable was the crowd of living prisoners which His Majesty carried away after his victory. And behold, I was at the head of our warriors. His Majesty admired my valor. 39. I carried off a chariot of war and its horses, and those who were upon it, as living prisoners, and brought them to His Majesty. Then was I presented with gold once more. 40. Now I have lived many days and have reached gray old age. My lot will be that of all men upon the earth. I shall go to the netherworld and be placed in the coffin, which I have made for myself. The grievous time of distress and oppression was now past. The reign of tyranny was broken up. Avarice had fallen, and the fortress of Sherahan had been taken by storm. In the 6th year of the reign of King Ahmes, the founder of the 18th dynasty of the Pharaohs, Clement was freed from the long oppression of the foreigners. Suknenra was the 3rd king of this name. He also bore in common with his 2 predecessors the family name of Ta. The inscriptions distinguish them, however, by special surnames, so that Ta'a the second was known by the addition of R the Great. Okay, there's an ain in there somewhere. Is it before or after Ta'a? And Ta the third by the epithet Ken, the brave or victorious. They were buried in Thebes, and therefore must probably have reigned in that city, an opinion which the Epic Papyrus strengthens. And you find that in the royal mummies of el-Bahari in page 361. King Ta'a the Third is surnamed the Brave, a predecessor of Ahmes, the conqueror of Avaris, built a Nile flotilla for the purpose of one day attacking the town in which lay in the watery lowlands of the Delta. His successor, named Ka Masas, seems to have reigned for but a short time. He was the husband of the much venerated Queen Hattup. Okay. Hattup. Is that how you say that? Whose coffin with the golden ornaments on her body was discovered by some Theban peasants in 1860 in the ancient necropolis of No, buried only a few feet below the surface of the ground. The cover of the coffin has the shape of a mummy and is gilt from top to bottom. The uras decks the brow. The eyelids are gilt. The whites of the eyes are quartz, and the pupils black glass. A rich imitation necklace covers the breast and shoulders. The uras and the vulture, the sacred symbols of sovereignty over the upper and lower lands, lie below the necklace. A pair of closed wings seems to protect the rest of the body. Beneath the feet stand the statues of the mourning entities considered to be goddesses, Isis and Nephthys. Is it Ost and what is the other one? Well, okay. The inscription gives the name of the queen, Hattup, that is, delight of the moon. When the coffin was opened, there was found in it daggers, a golden axe, a chain with 3 large golden bees, and a breastplate, while a golden chain with a scarabæus attached. A fillet for the brow, armlets, and other objects were on the body. 2 little ships in gold and silver, bronze axes, and great anklets lay immediately upon the wood of the coffin. The golden bark and the bronze axes exhibited the cartouche of Chemes. But the most valuable of the ornaments bore that of Ahmes with the surname of Next, the victorious. And remember my little ritual formula that I used to use all the time. Next, Suxt, Athir. Power, strength, and authority. So let us remember that Isis is Yest or Yest Sa, and Nephthys, Nebetasa or Nebhatasa. Without doubt, Queen Hattup was buried in Thebes, where also was the tomb of her royal husband. She is the real ancestress of the 18th dynasty, and it was her son, Ahmes, who afterwards rose up as the avenger of his native country. It would seem as if hatred of the Egyptians against the Hyksos kings were by no means so intense as the story handed down by Manetho appears to represent it, for it had been, how is the strange fact to be explained that these same Egyptians could prevail upon themselves to give their children pure Semitic names, borrowed from the language of their hereditary enemies? Or how could they themselves offer their homage to those considered to be gods by the strangers? There was a family actually employed in the temple of Yemen whose ancestor called himself Put-Baal, the servant of Baal. You know, the ancient, they thought that El had a son, so, the father having the son deity. But anyways, his wife was Abrakro, and among his descendants we find such names as Atu, Tina, Tata, Amma, Tanafa, and Tir. It is to the Theban kings of the 18th dynasty that the questionable fame belongs of having destroyed the monuments of the hostile kings in order to falsify historical truth, and they almost succeeded in extirpating all contemporary memorials of the Hyksos. Ahmes, their conqueror, and after him Imhotep III, certainly rebuilt and restored the temples which had fallen into ruins, though inscriptions in no way attribute this decay to the destructiveness of the Hyksos. They simply remark that the temples had fallen into ruins since the time of their forefathers. The only allusion to foreigners, and this has nothing to do with any destruction by them, is found on the rock tablets of the 22nd year of King Ahmes. It runs thus: "This stone was drawn by oxen which were brought here and entrusted to care of the foreign people of the Fennec. These Pharaohs appear clearly to be the most ancient representatives of the Phoenicians on the, oh, it's a facsimile thing, but let's see, on Egyptian soil. Before concluding this chapter with the chronological relations of these historical events, with special reference to the sojourn of the Hyksos and of the children of Israel in the land of Egypt, must be mentioned. First, there is in the memorial stone of the days of Ramses II found in Tanis the inscription on which commences in the year 400 on the 4th day of the month Masori of King Nub. This tablet of red granite engraved with an act of homage in memory of Seti I was set up by a high officer of state by the order of Ra-Masu II. After the usual glorification of the king, the inscription proceeds as follows: His Majesty King Ra-Masu II gave orders to raise a great memorial of granite of Sion to the exalted name of his father, animated by the desire to uphold thereby the name of his royal father and of his forefathers. May the remembrance of King Mamun-Ra, Seti Meneptah I, remain and endure forever, today and every day. In the year 400, the month Masori, the 4th day of King Apute-Nub, the friend of whom is considered to be a god, Horemku, may he live forever and ever. When there had come to this city the hereditary lord and the chief governor of the city, the fan-bearer on the right of the king, the leader of the foreign legions, and the captain of the foreigners, the constable of the fortress of Katam, the Atham of scripture, Inzar, the leader of the Mazai police, and the royal scribe, the chief master of the horse, the high priest of the ram entity, and Mendes, the high priest, of who's considered to be a god, Sataks, and the praying priest, of who's considered to be a goddess, Wutu Aptani, the chief of the prophets of all who were considered to be gods, Seti, the son of the hereditary prince, the commander of the foreign legions, the captain of the foreigners, the constable of Katam and Zar, the royal scribe and master of the horse, Pa-Ra-Masu, the child of the lady and priestess of who's considered to be a sun god, Ra. Tha. Then spake he thus: Hail to thee, Set, son of Nub, thou strong one in the holy ship. Grant me a fortunate existence, that I may serve thee, and grant me to remain in thy house forevermore. Since on the basis of the most recent and best investigations as of 1902, right? Actually, I think this was there an earlier book? Because, okay, 1891, but this was abridged in 1902 and made into one volume. Okay. Since on the basis of the most recent and best investigations in the province of ancient Egyptian chronology, we reckon the year 1350 BCE as a mean computation for the reign of the above-named Ramses, the reign of the Hyksos king Nub, and probably its beginning falls in the year 1750 BCE, that is 400 years before Ra-Masu II. Although we are completely in the dark as to the place which King Nub occupied in the succession of the kindred princes of his house, yet the number mentioned is important as approximate epoch for the stay of the foreign kings in Egypt. According to the statement in the Bible, the Hebrews, from the emigration of Yaqub into Egypt, Yaqupar is actually an Egyptian inscription or something. Jacob of Egypt until the Exodus remained 430 years in that land. Since the Exodus from Egypt took place in the time of Meneptah II, the son of Ramses II, the Pharaoh of the oppression, the year BCE 1330 may be an approximate date. If we add this to this 430 years expression, as expressing the total duration of the sojourn of the Hebrews in Egypt, we arrive at the year 1730 BCE as the approximate date for the immigration of Jacob into Egypt and for the time of the official career of Joseph at the court of Pharaoh. In other words, the time of Joseph, 1730 BCE, must have fallen into the period of the Hyksos domination, about the reign of the above-mentioned born prince Nub of 1750 BCE. This singular coincidence of numbers appears to have higher value than the dates given in the chronological tablets of Manetho and the Fathers of the Church, and shows that the probability of a fixed time for an important section of universal history on the basis of two chronological data, which correspond in a way almost marvelously. In fact, the supposition that it was under the Hyksos that Joseph was sold into Egypt as resulting from the relations thus obtained stronger probability from the writings of Georgius Senkeles, who states that Joseph ruled the land in the reign of Apophis, whose age preceded the commencement of the 18th dynasty by only a few years, on the basis of an old inscription at El-Kab, the author of which must have been a contemporary of Joseph. It is possible to establish the proof that Joseph and the Hyksos are inseparable from one another. It must be remembered that in the days of the patriarch, a 7 years famine occurred in consequence of a deficiency in the inundation. Although there is no royal cartouche in the tomb to which the inscription refers, there is internal evidence to show that Baba, its owner, must have lived immediately previous to the 18th dynasty. Baba, the risen again, speaks thus: I loved my father, I honored my mother, my brothers and my sisters loved me. I went out of the door of my house with benevolent heart. I stood there with refreshing hand. Splendid were my preparations of what I collected for the festal day. Mild was my heart, free from violent anger. Who we consider to be the gods, bestowed upon me abundant prosperity on earth. The city wished me health and a life full of enjoyment. I punished the evildoers. The children who stood before me in the town during the days which I fulfilled were great and small. 60. Just as many beds were provided for them, just as many chairs, just as many tables. They all consumed 120 ephahs of durra, the milk of 3 cows, 52 goats, and 9 she-donkeys, a hin of balsam, and 2 jars of oil. My words may seem a jest to a gainsayer, but I call upon whom I consider to be a god, Mentu, to witness that what I say is true. I had all this prepared in my house. In addition, I put cream in the store chamber and beer in the cellar in a more than sufficient number of hin measures. I collected corn as a friend of the harvested, a friend of whom I consider to be the harvest god. I was watchful at the time of sowing, and when a famine arose lasting many years, I distributed corn to the city each year of famine. That's ending the quote. Not the smallest doubt can be raised as to whether the last, which I altered because I didn't, the way that you recognize. Not the smallest doubt can be raised as to whether the last words of the inscription relate to an historical fact or not. However strongly we may be inclined to recognize a general way of speaking in the narrative of Yemeneh, where years of famine are spoken of, just as strongly does the context of the present statement compel us to refer this record of a famine lasting many years to an epoch historically defined. Now, since famines succeeding one another are of the very greatest rarity in Egypt, and Baba lived and worked under the native king of Suknen Ra Ta'a the Third. I don't have to know the Egyptian characters, right? In the ancient city of El Kab, upon the same time during which Joseph exercised his office under one of the Hyksos kings, there remains for a satisfactory conclusion but one fair inference, that the many years of famine in the days of Baba must correspond to the 7 years of famine under Joseph's Pharaoh, who was one of the shepherd kings. The account of the elevation of Joseph under one of them, all of his life at the court, the reception of his father and brothers in Egypt with their belongings, is in complete accordance with the prepositions connected with the persons and also with the place and time. Joseph's Pharaoh resided at Zoan, Avras, without his court, in the thorough Egyptian fashion. Yet, without excluding the Semitic language, he gave orders to proclaim in the Semitic language an abrek, that is, to bow the knee, a word which still retained in the hieroglyphic dictionary and was adopted by the Egyptians to express their feeling of reverence at the sight of an important person or object. He bestowed on Joseph the high dignity of a death that pa a net ak, governor of the district of the living one, or of Seth Ro'it known. And we're going to read those characters, right? We have governor, pa of the district, tenant of pa the place next of life. So pa tenant pa next of life. I didn't have to take that tone, but I'm still a bit sick here. So the name of Joseph's wife, Asenath, Snot, was pure Egyptian and is seldom met with except in the Old and Middle Empire. His father-in-law, the priest of On, was an Egyptian whose name, Patapera, means the gift of the sun. The chamberlain who brought Joseph from the Midianites bore also the same designation, yet his titles are given in the Semitic language, although the word sari, or chamberlain, is found written in Egyptian characters. The tale of the two brothers in the Orebene papyrus is of great value for the special relation in which it stands to the history of Joseph. Anpu, a married man, as the papyrus relates, sent his younger brother, saying to him, "Hasten and bring us seed corn from the village." Planting wheat. And the young brother found the wife of his elder brother occupied in braiding her hair. And he said to her, Rise up, give me seed corn, that I may return to the field. For thus has my elder brother enjoined me to return without delay. The woman said to him, Go in, open the chest, thou mayest take what thine heart desires, otherwise my locks will fall by the way. And the youth entered into the stable and took thereout a large vessel, for it was his wish to carry away much seed corn. And he loaded himself with wheat and grains of durra and went out with it. Then she said to him, How great is the burden on thine arm? He said to her, 2 measures of durra and 3 measures of wheat, making together 5 measures, which rest on my arms. Thus he spake to her. But she spake to the youth and said, How great is thy strength? Well have I remarked thy vigor every time. And her heart knew him. And she stood up and laid hold of him. And she said to him, Come, let us enjoy an hour's rest. The most beautiful thing shall be thy portion, for I will prepare for thee festal garments. Then the youth became like to the panther of the south for rage, on account of the evil word which she had spoken to him. Oh, you speak of panthers, and my stomach growls. That's interesting. But she was afraid beyond all measure. And he spoke to her and said, Thou, O woman, hast been to me like a mother, and thy husband like a father, for he is older than I, so that he might have been my parent. Why this so great sin that thou hast spoken to me? Say it not to me another time. Then will I not tell it this time, and no word of it shall come out of my mouth about it to any man whatsoever. Then he loaded himself with his burden and went out into the field. And he went to his elder brother, and they completed their day's work. When it was now evening, the elder brother returned home to his dwelling, and his younger brother followed behind his oxen, which he had laden with all the good things of the field, driving them before him to prepare for them the resting place and the stable in the village. And behold, the wife of his elder brother was afraid because of the word which she had spoken, and took a jar of fat, and she was like one to whom an evildoer had offered violence. She wished thereby to say to her husband, Thy young brother has offered me violence. And her young husband, and her husband returned home at evening according to his daily custom, and entered into his house, and she found his wife lying stretched out and suffering from injury. She gave him no water for his hands according to her custom, and the lamp was not lighted, so that the house was in darkness. But she lay there and vomited. And her husband spoke to her thus, Who has had to do with thee? Lift thyself up. She said to him, No one has had to do with me except thy young brother. For when he came to take the seed corn for thee, he found me sitting alone, and said to me, Come, let us make merry an hour and rest. Let down thy hair. Thus he spake to me, but I did not listen to him, but said, See, am I not thy mother, and is not thy elder brother like a father to thee? Thus I spoke to him, but he did not hearken to my speech, and used force with me that I might not make a report to thee. Now if thou allowest him to live, I will kill myself. The whole story is in M. Letag, Renounce Records of the Past, Volume 2, page 137. The reader will at once perceive that Potiphar's wife and Anpu's wife precisely resemble each other, and Joseph's and Batu's temptations and virtue appear so closely allied that one is almost inclined to suppose a common origin of the two stories. Of course, I'm sure such things have probably happened again and again throughout history, every generation at least. Not a good thing. You know. That Joseph was actually invested with the highest rank at court next to the king is evident from the office he filled of an Adon over all Egypt. Genesis 45:9. According to the monuments, Adon answers to the Greek epistatis, a president, one set over others. The rank of such a dignitary varied according to his special duties. We found an Adon of the city of Ibn, of the seat of justice, of the infantry, of the beer sellers, and so forth. Quite different from all was the office of Joseph as Adon community leader over the whole land. A title met with only once among the inscriptions. Before King Horemheb of the 18th dynasty ascended the throne, he was invested with several high offices. At last, the pharaoh was so pleased with him that he named him Roher, a procurator of the whole land. In his capacity, without having any colleague beside him, he was called to be great lord in the king's house, and he gave answer to the king and contented him with the utterances of his mouth. In such a service, Horemheb was an Adon of the whole land during the course of many years, and at length rose to the dignity of heir to the throne of the whole land, until finally he placed the royal crown on his own head. 1700 years before the birth of the only one the Christians accept as Christ, is about the epoch when the middle separates from the new empire. The devastated regions of Avaris and Zoan were forgotten and forsaken, and with the new race came the time of requital and vengeance on the descendants of the former conquerors of Egypt, even to the fourth and fifth generations. The theater of these great events was removed to Western Asia, where Megiddo, Kadesh, Carchemish, henceforth formed the focus of all warlike movements. The monuments begin from this point to afford us clear and intelligible history, for they cease not to celebrate in poetry and prose the glory and splendor of their authors.